David Brewster here with another 3-for-all, and this is 3 Kiko Loureiro licks from 2001. And Kiko Loureiro is a Brazilian guitarist, and he's been on the scene since the late 80s. And he's released a number of solo albums, and he's released and worked with the band Angra for a long time. And there's a lot of albums, featuring his playing with that group. And there's some other projects that he was involved with. But most people, especially, if you're in Europe or Japan or in the United States, most people became aware of Kiko when he joined Megadeth about 5 years ago in 2015. And they released the album Dystopia. And I know when I heard that album and I heard his playing, I was like, who's this new guy? In Megadeth, I was not familiar with Kiko Loureiro. And, once I bought that album and then I started to research who he is, I realized he's been around for a long time and he's a monstrous guitarist. So if you know who he is, you know what's coming, because there's some sick licks and crazy ideas in this lesson. And if you don't know who he is, prepare yourself, because Brazilian music's very different, noticeably different than what you hear in America or in Europe or in Japan. And we've recently looked at some different Swedish guitarists, and guitarists and musicians from Sweden have a very different approach to melody and harmony and things like that. And definitely, Brazilian music has a very exotic, flavor, and there's rhythmic ideas and all these nuances. And Kiko just shines. He plays electric, he also plays nylon string and acoustic, and he can play anything. I mean, he can shred, he can play metal, he can play rock, he can play jazz and fusion and classical and all sorts of stuff. So I hope you brought your fingers, because you're definitely going to need them for this lesson. There's some crazy, wicked ideas coming up. So here we go. The first lick is insane, so I'm going to go ahead and say that up front. So we're starting with one of the most difficult licks in this whole lesson, but each lick that we're going to look at has a very different approach. And like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of exotic scales and unusual tonalities floating around. And this is really interesting. He's using like pivot arpeggios, but he's also using an open string. And it kind of reminds me of like a beefed up Randy Rhoads lick, really, because you hear the pull off, very similar to Randy, but then he's actually adding, like a lower note on an adjacent string too. And then he's moving around in this very unusual progression, but it's something like this, and this is really tough. And you can see there it's really unusual, because he's also using like a heavy palm mute, and he's kind of dampening the strings, and you get this muted, blurry kind of sound. So let me slow that down so we can go through, each segment of that idea, and you can actually hear what's going on. And I'm going to play it slower, and I'm not going to palm mute as much, so that way you can actually hear what we're doing. So that's going to function as E minor right there. And then we're going to move down just a little bit. We're still going to grab that B, but then that's going to basically be a B flat 13. And then we're going to move all the way up here, and then this is going to be an F sharp minor flat 9. And then go back to E minor. So right there we've got this kind of four areas right there. Here's the first one. Number 2. Number 3. And then we're back to where we started with number 4. Then we're going to move all the way up here, and we're back in E minor again, just in a different location. And this is really tough. We're actually going to move the pinky up a fret, and we're going to move the index finger back a fret. And that's going to become an E add 9 sharp 5. So that's really tricky, because we just came out of this E minor. And then both the outside fingers, the index and the pinky, are going to both stretch an extra fret, lower and higher. That's weird. Something like that. Then we're going to move back here, here, and that's going to be a D add 11. And then right there, we're going to keep everything the same on the G string, and we're going to raise that D up to a D sharp, and then that's going to change it to a B7 flat 13. And just end with that E minor again. So let me run through that again kind of slowly, and that way you can kind of hear it connected, and then I'll run through it again faster too. So here it is kind of slow. And he keeps going. I'm just kind of ending with that little harmonic there at the end, or you can just end on that E on the 14th fret. But he does continue that idea, and it's terrifying. You know, when you see the footage, it's like, oh my gosh. So I wanted to include this lick, even though that's really tough. So now I'm going to add the palm muting technique like he was doing in the live clip, and run through it again kind of fast, which this, you know, once again, is really hard. And I guess the hardest part is just getting it clean, because you've got the open string and then it's really a clumsy lick. So work on that really slowly. Here's a string skipped arpeggio from this live solo, and it reminds me of Paul Gilbert, but Kiko has definitely put his own spin or twist on these arpeggios. And it looks and sounds like this. It's pretty cool. And right there you can see we're starting with E minor right here. And then you're going to raise this up to C, and that's going to change that arpeggio to C major. And go back to E minor. And right there he kind of sneaks in E diminished. Go back to E minor. Play C major again. And then shift back and you've got D major right here. And then you're going to move back just a little bit more, and there's A major hiding right here. So I definitely like how he arranged those arpeggios. You know, he's changing or manipulating one note, and it's changing the tonality or the chord progression or arpeggio progression. Really cool. Here's a phrase melodic lick from the solo, and it's flirting with E Hungarian minor. And we've mentioned Hungarian minor in a few episodes, 3 for All already. And it does have a Marty Friedman kind of vibe to it, because Marty definitely uses Hungarian minor too. But once again, Kiko has kind of put his signature stamp on this. It's really cool. And I love how it just kind of starts with this slide, you know, from nowhere. And he's targeting, you know, that A sharp right there. And he's also kind of targeting the root. You know, he's kind of encircling, kind of playing around it, and then he lands right on it. I like that opening. Really cool. And bend this B up a half step and back. It's like a little piece of an A minor arpeggio right there. Grab this F sharp, bend that up a half step and back. And then he slides F sharp to E, and then E to F sharp. And then he ends it with a tapped harmonic on E, which is pretty cool. So one more time there. Something like that. that. I screwed up the first harmonic, but there we go. Here's a bonus lick from this live solo, and this is really cool. It's kind of flirting with B Phrygian dominant, and it starts with this legato phrase, and then he cruises down an arpeggio, but he's not picking. He's just using all left hand. And you can definitely find, classic examples of this from people like Jason Becker and Richie Kotzen, back in their shrapnel days. And both of those players were notorious for just playing one-handed legato, cleanly and efficiently. And it was never fair, to see that. And it's just like, you gotta be kidding me. It's like he's not even picking. He's just doing, one-handed. And of course, Becker famously, with the yo-yo in one hand and the guitar, just blazing a trail on the fretboard, at the same time. But this lick, it's really, really cool. Check this out. And there you can see we're basically starting with this legato phrase. And then right there, without picking, you're just coming down. And then he ends on that C right there. And there you can hear, it's B Phrygian dominant based. But really cool, and I love those kind of phrases where you don't really expect it to be played that way. And he continues, he does a few more legato ideas like that, and it took me a minute to even realize what was going on. And then he started picking again, and you could hear the pick, and it was like, oh, he's playing all that just legato. And then I watched it again, and was just floored. I thought, wow, this guy is marvelous. Kiko is a monster. Let me run through that again kind of slow, because this is unusual. It's not very common, and it's very hard, to kind of get used to doing that at first. So it starts with this. And even just playing with that top part, is a really good legato exercise. And then right there, we're going to cruise down this arpeggio. And you really don't hear him pick again until he grabs that last note, the C. So what I would recommend you do if you want to practice, that one-handed arpeggio, is you don't really want to mute. That's the other part that's really hard with this, is you can't really use like dampening or muting, because you'll silence those notes. You want them to ring freely. And I'm really just kind of using, like my kind of the slight palm mute on the low E string, because I'm making sure that one's not going to make any noise. And then I'm really just kind of stepping my way through that arpeggio. And you can hear I made a little noise there, so I have to try it again. And that's tough. And I would practice that. Just practice that arpeggio. And of course he kind of races, toward the end of it. It reminds me of Chopin or something like that. A very unusual phrase, but I love it. It's so exotic and cool. That's going to wrap this look at 3 Kiko Loureiro licks from 2001, and I'm definitely a fan of Kiko's. I'm a little bit late to the party because I didn't really know who he was until 2015, but I've had a really good time kind of going back, checking out some of his solo albums and some of the other appearances and the recordings he's played on. So I'm anxious to see, what Megadeth's going to release, because I know they're putting a new album together, and I would like to see him play live. I don't know if they're going to be cruising through my neck of the woods on a tour anytime soon, but definitely I would like to see Kiko shred his stuff, in person, because I've watched a lot of concert footage and listened to some albums. Just a phenomenal player, very different, exotic ideas coming from everywhere. And definitely he's a really talented electric guitarist, but then he's also just amazing on acoustic and, nylon string, playing classical and flamenco and all these different things. Really cool stuff. So leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.